So great. And a delight to be here tonight. And I'm going to be going through what I normally spend quite a bit of time going through, so you'll very quickly. So you'll forgive me for that. I think a key message that I'd like to leave you with is that green chemistry is really about adding a tremendous amount of value to what it is to chemistry. And green chemistry is a new field of chemistry. It's how you think about and practice chemistry, okay? It's not something that is separate and apart from. It should be something that you incorporate in what you do every day. Let's see. Shameless plug for our institute. We are a very small group that is really trying to catalyze the implementation of green chemistry throughout the global chemistry enterprise. And we do that through science, education, and industry. And the Pharmaceutical Roundtable is really one of our jewels of industry collaboration. Started in 2005, and you'll hear more about that from Juan. I'd like to draw your attention to the tagline there, engaging you to reimagine chemistry and engineering for a sustainable future. And there's really three parts to that. One is you. If you are not engaged in doing green chemistry, then we really don't have a hope for the future. And I do mean that sincerely. Reimagining is, I'll get into more, but it isn't that chemistry, you're going to invent or change the laws of thermodynamics or kinetics. It's really the way in which we do chemistry is completely unsustainable. And that's what we need to reimagine. We need to think about doing chemistry in a way which doesn't have the kinds of impacts that it has with it. And finally, it's really for chemistry and engineering. There are no two disciplines that are better suited to do something about changing the sustainability of the world, in my opinion, fundamentally. Why reimagine chemistry? Well, from everything from feedstocks through chemicals, the kind of chemistries, how we put the molecules together, the processes that we use, the manufacturing processes, products, they're all done in a way right now which arguably are not sustainable. Once again, we have to change that particular paradigm. I know that each of you comes here with a particular worldview, and that worldview influences how you think about things. So I'd like to let people know where I'm coming from so you know how I view the world. Plenty of resources versus finite or diminishing resources. We act as though the materials that we have available to us will be available to us in exactly the same quantities or increasing quantities forever. And that's just simply not true. We've got to close the loop of the economy. And we're facing a period of diminishing resources. There's only so much you can extract from the ground and put into the built environment until there's nothing left, right? And that's a trend that we have to figure out how to get around. Population is what drives unsustainability, frankly. And if we don't do something to control the world's population, we're going to be in real stressed situations throughout the world. We treat the environment as though it's an infinite sink, that we can continue to put things into the water or the air or into the land, and the environment will somehow magically take care of it. That's just not true. In fact, the environment is at a point of significant stress throughout the world. You know, everything from species extinction to stresses on water to stresses on land. Life as I know it will continue just as it always has. I mean, we as humans don't expect anything really to dramatically change, and so we live our lives, we get up in the morning and we think it's going to be just the same, and it's really not true. We are facing a period of tremendous change. You just look at the past year of all the world events that have happened and how that will impact business, how that will impact society. It's just enormous. I think it's really important to make sure that you're asking the right questions. And a lot of things around green chemistry and sustainable chemistry is making sure that you're finding the answers to the right questions, not the wrong questions. Pharmaceutical supply chain, what I'm going to be talking about today is informed largely out of spending about 17 and a half years in the pharma industry. So batch operations, intimately familiar, everything from raw materials through use phase of pharmaceuticals through end-of-life considerations, and I've really touched on all those aspects. What I'm asking you to think about tonight is really much broader than what you're normally thinking about, which is my manufacturing facility or perhaps what I do in marketing and distributing pharmaceuticals. It's also true that green chemistry is just one aspect of sustainability that all of you have to think about on a regular basis. And these are just some of the ones that are facing you on an everyday basis. So green chemistry is just one other to add to all these risks that your businesses face. I wouldn't be a chemist if I wasn't showing a periodic table, right? So you probably have not seen a periodic table like this one. And the point I'm trying to make with this is that there are a series of elements throughout this periodic table that we use on a daily basis that are at points of stress. In other words, the ability to extract them and process them and bring them to manufacturing is becoming increasingly difficult. This particular area, platinum group metals, is one that is used tremendously in chemistry and in the pharma industry. In fact, you wouldn't be doing the kinds of chemistries to make the drugs you make without those elements right now. Suzuki couplings, Sanuba reactions, so on and so forth. They're all tremendously dependent on those elements. And the point being that those elements not necessarily are not going to be available. Will become increasingly costly, and they will become available only through a significant and increasing environmental devastation, right? Because they only come from certain parts of the world. The other thing that a lot of people in chemistry really don't understand is where things come from in terms of primary metals production and secondary metals production. In other words, when I mine copper, I get all these other elements, or I mine tin, I get these elements, so on and so forth. And if you might say, well, then all we need to do is recycle, right, and close the loop. The problem is, if we're not doing primary metals extraction, we're not going to get these particular elements. And if you look at relative earth abundance, these things are extremely rare. I'd point out that indium comes from a number of different places. Why am I focusing on indium? Everybody has a cell phone or a computer, and indium is in every kind of electronics out there. Indium is thought to have somewhere between 4 to 17 years of supply at current rates of use. So think of a world where you cannot use indium tin oxide in electronics because you can't get it, right? It's a real problem for the world. Zinc, another element that's used a lot in chemistry. It's not that it is only used in chemistry. In fact, it's used in these kinds of other things. Chemicals only 6%. But if zinc is used in all these other applications, it's going to mean it's going to be harder to get it for chemical applications. Tin is another one. There's something like 50% of the pharma-based reactions still rely on some tin in their synthesis. And so tin is something that is tremendously stressed throughout the world and rapidly being depleted. Rhodium is another element, platinum group. We use rhodium, palladium, ruthenium, elements like that. They're all like this. Extremely rare elements in general in terms of earth abundance, 0.0002 parts per million. The other thing to think about with these elements is that many times we take them out of the ground, massive ore piles. There's only a couple ways of getting that ore out of the ground. You end up with a tremendous amount of environmental devastation. Something that most of us don't think about are the socioeconomic considerations around platinum group metals mining. In 2012 alone in South Africa, 50,000 miners were let go because they were striking for a living wage. And 34 miners in just one of those striking actions, were killed. What happened in South Africa in 2012 when that occurred? Mining ended up being shifted to other places in the world. So there's really two places platinum groups metals largely come out of. It's Russia and it's South Africa. But a fair amount of the South African market went to Burkina Faso. And in Burkina Faso, they have artisanal mines. And artisanal mines are things that are mines, small mines, owned by clans or tribes in that country. And they're very small mines. They narrow shafts. In fact, they're so small and narrow that the only people that can get down them are children. So you have 8 to 12-year-old children who are being let down into mine shafts and working 10 to 12 hours a day, very high temperatures. They have to come up with that ore at night. They take that ore, they crack it, they make a mercury amalgam out of it, and they sinter off that mercury. So you have child labor, you have mercury amalgams that are devastating the environment, so on and so forth. This is a side of metals mining that we don't really think about when we are using those elements in our laboratories. Phosphorus is another element. Phosphorus is tremendously important to life. In other words, if you didn't have phosphorus, you wouldn't be living right now. We use it as in the pharma industry and phosphoric acid or as counterions to our drugs. Phosphorus comes from just a few places, in the world. So Morocco and China are probably the two biggest producers. The problem with phosphorus isn't that we're going to run out immediately. There's something like 300 years of phosphate rock left. The problem is that we're not doing anything to really recycle phosphorus. The other problem is a geopolitical one, and if you look at the political stability of a country like Morocco, or if you look at China, China has already demonstrated in the rare earths market that it can constrict availability of those elements. So again, we need to think about phosphorus and whether or not